If you want Colts talk all year long, you're in the right place.
Fires it upfield, caught over the middle. Michael Pittman Jr., there he goes! He's at the 40, he's at the 30, slips out of a tackle, 20, 10, 5, touchdown! Michael Pittman Jr. takes it 75 yards to the house. Big run, angling left, 40, he's at the 30, down the near sideline, 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown! Jonathan Taylor, a 49-yard gallop to pay dirt.
In the Indiana Union Construction Industry radio studio, let's get the podcast started.
What's up, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the official Colts podcast here on the Colts Audio Network and on the Colts YouTube page. I'm JJ Stankevitz in the hot seat for Jeffrey Gorman and for Matt Taylor. I guess I'm like the third guy off the bench to host the podcast this week. With
sure are.
Casey Vallier and Larra Overton. I'll be totally honest with our viewers here. Usually I put a rundown together to kind of, let's keep the podcast on track here.
But rarely do we stay on track anyway.
Well, right.
So, yeah.
Especially when Gorman's hosting. We're all over the place. We're talking about cleaning cracks in garages
Take
and stuff.
6 with Gorman and go.
Right. If Gorman even remembers to hit record. But this episode, I honestly didn't even have the time to do it because I've been working real hard. Casey and I actually have been working very hard, heads down.
Top secret.
Well, it's not top secret.
It's not.
We are, on June 24th, premiering the first episode of our 4-part narrative podcast series telling the story of why the Colts are here. It's called The Move, and it will...
And you don't mean why the Colts are in this position. You mean why the Colts are in Indianapolis.
Right, in Indianapolis.
Yeah, why the Colts are
How
in
did we
Indianapolis.
get here?
That's a good point. Why they are physically here in Indianapolis is the question that I set out to answer with Casey's help. So the episode 1 of The Move will come out on June 24th. That is all about Baltimore.
Yep.
And the history of the Baltimore Colts, and kind of it builds up how the Baltimore Colts became this big part of civic pride in Baltimore, and then it kind of tears them down to the point that they were ready to leave. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is not only that this podcast is going to be all over the place today, but we are actually going to put all of our programming on the Colts Audio Network on hiatus for a little bit while we get these episodes out. So between June 24th and July 15th, the only thing you're going to see in your feeds, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and the Colts Audio Network, is episodes of The Move.
Okay.
On YouTube, we won't have any shows between those dates as well. We'll be right back, on July 16th, though, because once July 16th hits, we're talking training camp.
Yep, it's right around the corner.
And we got some exciting stuff planned for training camp and the regular season once we get there, but we're full steam ahead on The Move. So this guy right here, Casey, has been a rock star in getting everything put together. Just hours upon hours of narration, audio clips, editing stuff. Like it has been a lift.
And that's in addition to the fact you're prepping for games already.
Right.
We're trying to.
So you're already ahead you're into week 3 by now or something.
The thing I love about the NFL season, as you guys can both agree with, is it's kind of it's separated in 2 ways of speed. Like in season, it is, you're going 100 miles an hour all the time, and then the off season. Like, I always love when my family members are like, oh, what do you got to do now during the off season? You probably have all the time in the world. I'm like, no. Honestly, the workload doesn't stop. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, I'm not necessarily busier during the off season,
but it's busy in a different way.
Absolutely. And I love to, you talk about the preparation, when week 1 gets here, whether that's preseason week 1 or regular season week 1, this time is where you prepare for that. So, yes, you're absolutely busy at all times. But, this Move podcast, I'm really excited for people to listen to it because I have learned – I've been here my whole life. I've heard the story of why they moved. But this is a real cool deep dive into where the Colts began in the Johnny Unitas's of Baltimore that kind of helped set the landscape for kind of what the NFL is now. And you realize that the Baltimore Colts were a part of all of that, and it's kind of cool that we're kind of in that history in a different way for sure.
Larra, one of the episodes, the second episode is all about Indianapolis and how Indianapolis went from this kind of overlooked Midwestern city to becoming an NFL city in the span of about 15, 20 years. The episode opens, Larra, and I want your thoughts on this, with a comparison between Indianapolis and Louisville in the 1960s, how they were pretty similar cities. in terms of size. They're within about 100,000 residents.
Right. They have the Kentucky Colonels, of
Yep.
course, and
the Pacers. They each had ABA teams. There were one event towns that were big college basketball
right. Indy
towns.
500 versus the Kentucky Derby.
Outside of the month of May, no one really thought about each of those towns.
Right.
And Indianapolis tried to compete with your Chicagos, your St. Louis's, your Kansas Cities, your Cleveland's in the Midwest, where Louisville, it's a great city, but I have this great quote from Debbie Knox, who's a longtime news reporter here
My
in
former
Indy.
colleague.
There you go.
I've worked with Debbie for
saying,
years.
I love Louisville, but it's a nice little city, and I call it little. Like how Indianapolis really competed to build up the city to get to the point where, hey, an NFL team could come here.
And in growing up around the Louisville area, working in that market for a long time, we have seen that Louisville has tried a lot of ways to catch up from that. They added, soccer. There was somewhat of a push to, would they try to make a charge at getting an NBA team there? They built the Yum Center just within the last 15 years to have a larger venue to be able to host Louisville basketball and major events and do other things. So it is interesting in that Louisville has still been on this 40-plus year run of trying to catch up for now what they see as, that was maybe the opportunity that was possibly on the table for us, and we decided to go in a different direction. And here's the other thing. It may not have worked in Louisville either.
Right. Uh-huh.
It's not that it would have necessarily had the success. The other interesting thing about Louisville, and when I was growing up there, I was later to come on to being a fan of the NFL, because you're somewhat in this equidistant area, not equidistant completely, but you're in this between from the Bengals, the Bears, and growing up, you had the St. Louis Rams, and then you, of course, have the Titans. So you have all of these kind of conflicting, competing entities when you're in Louisville of people who are fans of other nearby franchises or have already built an affiliation with one of those. That would a team that could have come in, would a professional football team be able to either have new fans who were college football fans of University of Kentucky or University of Louisville or whatever, or are you going to be able to pull fans who are Bengals fans, Titans fans, still lingering Rams fans, whatever it is. So it's really, really interesting. I mean, I didn't start watching the NFL until I went to college and was in Bloomington and had Sundays were our days off. And that is, the ascension of this franchise in Indianapolis. So I think that it really is a very interesting conversation. And Debbie is such a perfect person to help illustrate exactly, from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, a lot of what led to that turn of events in that particular period.
All right, so that's kind of the tee up here for the Move podcast, for what you can expect on the Colts Audio Network in the next couple of weeks. We got a little bit of football still to talk about this week and next week before we take a bit of a break here on the official Colts podcast. Last week, the Colts finished up their offseason program with veteran minicamp, 3 days up here on 56th Street. 3 practices. The last one ended with kind of a throwing competition.
Pretty impressive throwing competition.
That video is up on our social media on YouTube.
EJ Speed showed off his arm, but man, Blake Freeland. I didn't either.
Didn't know EJ Speed was a lefty out there.
Blake Freeland can sling it. I was,
he played quarterback.
Okay, I mean, I knew he was an athlete. I know he was a pretty good basketball player in his time. So I was a little surprised at how well he could. I mean, very natural spiral. It was like, hey, if it gets to the point where you have to have some trickery where a tackle is throwing a ball, I'd be all right with Blake.
That may be a bit of a stretch, right there.
Hey, just throwing it out there.
Let's talk about the guy who is throwing the football for the Colts, but who did not on Thursday, and that's Anthony Richardson. So I understand around these parts, whenever a quarterback has something pop up during OTAs, it is a cause for concern because of what we all experienced in 2019 and obviously the years prior to that with Andrew Luck. Anthony Richardson had a sore shoulder that he experienced during practice on Wednesday. He was held out of Thursday's practice. And everything that he said, everything that Shane Steichen said, was this is absolutely nothing to be worried about. Something Anthony Richardson said on Thursday was, honestly, it was surprising to him he hadn't encountered this before
Right.
through the process, because he was told you're going to experience some soreness. Some days are going to be worse than others. And the Colts decided last day of this thing, last day of minicamp, just take a break. It didn't even rise to the level of needing to be looked at other than throw some ice on it,
Right.
and you'll be good. This does not strike me as a big deal, but given where we are in the news cycle, given the understandable scars of fans here in Indianapolis, it's a pretty big deal. So where do you guys kind of fall on your level of concern? Like, give me like a number between 1 and 10.
6.
Okay.
Like, I'm okay. Like, slightly any time that you have a soreness shoulder
Yep.
with a person at that position, it's going to raise a little bit of an eyebrow, right? Now, it's not higher to me because Anthony Richardson has been throwing since February.
Yeah.
So it's not like that this is the very first time that he's thrown and now he's taking steps back, whatever it is. It is the first time that he is throwing with this level of intensity, being that you are in mini camp, you're actually throwing with receivers, you have live periods, all of that. So I also think like that's probably pretty normal given that accentuated ramp up that you had on Tuesday and Wednesday, and he's able to. The other thing is, at what point, when you look at, you can't just look at minicamp. Let's look at the collective, going back into the voluntary period, OTAs and all of that. And he has been slinging the football, right?
Yeah, you haven't noticed any restrictions.
No, he's been pushing the ball downfield. There have been no restrictions, any of that. So I think that I don't have a ton of experience with an AC joint sprain and the recovery and the surgery and all of that. But I would think that with the magnitude of any procedure like that, there is probably an anticipated level of, you're probably going to have some soreness in the shoulder when you are, taking more reps and doing all of that. And then the other part of it to me is, I would rather you take a rest day in June, not suffer a setback, not overexert yourself and set yourself back where, okay, now you're not throwing for maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks. So I do think that in the long run, this is the smart thing to do. Yeah, and I also think, hey, I'm going to warn you guys this too. Don't be shocked if maybe he gets into camp and you have a rest day here and there that may be planned, or you might have to adapt for too. So, and that's not going to be a trigger of a greater issue. This is something that you just kind of have to know is going to be in place and in plan and part of allowing him to progress back to the point that he is able to play at the level that you want him to play. Think about starting the season in September. Think about where you want to be in October, November. Play the long game with this. This is about the long-term health of Anthony Richardson, and that was part of the reason that he had the procedure rather than rehabbing it and trying to rush back. This is all about making sure that he is healthy for the long run, for the long term. Trust me, when it comes to December and you're making a playoff run, you're going to be real happy you had some rest days in June, July, and August.
Or no one will remember that this even happened. Casey, something that Shane Steichen said is that if we had a game on Sunday, he'd be playing.
Right.
Like, I think you have to think about it in the sense, kind of like you mentioned, Larra, like you're always looking at how do we get the guys to Sunday. And if that means that you get a rest day in June, okay, you'll absolutely take that. If that means maybe, like you said, Larra, that you get to training camp and you say maybe we need to dial it back a little bit for a day, okay, you do that. I don't think the Colts are there yet, by the way. Like, this is not a, like, they're starting to think about, like, how are we going to give Anthony Richardson rest during training camp, during the regular season. But if it all leads to Anthony Richardson being on the field on Sundays, of which, by the way, the Colts play nothing but Sunday games, thanks, NFL, it's just...
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it.
Very easy routine to get into.
Yeah, very easy.
I don't really see the big deal in it.
No, I'm with you. And I think part of it, too, to piggyback a little bit off what Larra say, you think about camp, and if there are rest days, in part, this is where Joe Flacco enters. This is why you bring in a guy like a Joe Flacco, because you don't really drop, you don't lose anything. So you want to keep Anthony Richardson as healthy as possible, but you also want the offense to continue to run kind of like a well-oiled machine, and that's what a guy like Joe Flacco can do. And that's in part where I say, all of that is helping the growth of Anthony Richardson, whether it's the mentorship that Joe Flacco is going to give you, but also what he can offer throwing to the other receivers and everybody on the offense. I think all of it is going to lead to Anthony being ready for Sundays. And that's why here in June, one rest day, and he's going through all the motions. He's doing like, yeah, I think that's also one thing that I looked at it as. He's out there. He's not standing on the sidelines just watching. I mean, he's still going through the reps. Yeah, instead of throwing, he might have tossed a couple with his left hand or, went through the motion. But so all of that leads to me saying this is very minor. This is something that we are expecting, not at all worried about it.
Also, I saw a quick clip from a podcast that Anthony was on in which he talked about, playing basketball and loving that. But the YMCA hoop sessions are done for
Yes,
now.
they are.
He was clear to say that. So anyone who's concerned about, is this, did he aggravate it? Was he dunking on people down at the Old City Way Y?
James Boyd asked him that question in his press conference.
Yeah.
James, who famously had the video of
him,
throwing it down last year at the Y. So I don't know. I mean, shout out to James, who does a great job. But I was thinking, James, you asking him if you're going to hoop with him this summer, or or you're going to maybe not see him at the Y. But probably the smart thing to do there is just dial it back on that. But
he has some other responsibilities now. Like he has a newborn baby, so he has a lot of other things that are pulling for his time and attention. So just not as much time to go out for a pickup game.
So with that kind of discussed, the rest of that vet mini camp, something that stood out to me. And Larra, I know you were up in Oregon for some of the USA track stuff, but my goodness, Adonai Mitchell. Like, holy cuss word. He had a day last week where, like, and look, I don't want to read too much into a non-padded practice in June. But the way that he moves is it is different than the other guys on the field. And I think that complements guys like Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, even Alec Pierce, who I know people are kind of saying, they're in competition together. The way that AD is so quick out of his breaks at his size with his speed is something that, now the Colts coaches have seen it in these practices. Now you start thinking, okay, that's what we saw on film at Texas. Now we've seen it here. Let's start thinking up how we can use him to be that explosive weapon that he proved to be in college. And like seeing it for yourself with him doing that in a Colts helmet, even if there are no pads on and it's June, whatever, the day he had, I think it was Tuesday, was like, my goodness, he was just cooking out there.
I remember about this time last year, we kept saying the same thing about Josh Downs, that he was making these strides you saw in rookie camp, and then he got into, I know he had that period of OTAs where he was hurt, so you weren't, but then you saw in camp, we were like, man, he's kind of picking up right where he left off. We've figured out, this guy's kind of figured it all out. And I had the same conversation with Stephen Holder, Mike Chappell. When we're out there watching, we said we felt this way last year in camp about Josh Downs, that it doesn't look like this learning curve of going from college to the NFL has, made that big of an impact. And that's what you want to see, because, you talk about it with A.D. Mitchell. I mean, this guy has played on the biggest stages. He played at Georgia. He played at Texas.
National championship games.
I mean, and you talk about the national champion. I mean, he played in 5 college playoff games and scored a touchdown in 5. Right? I mean, that right there. That shows that when the lights are shining the brightest, this guy can play. So I'm not at all surprised in that. But you aren't wrong. I mean, it was poetry in motion watching him play.
Here's why I was willing to kind of talk about it a little bit more. Like sometimes, and this is no shot, but like, do you remember a couple of years ago when Mike Strawn had like a really he was like
Mega Strawn
OTAs, and he was doing it where he was kind of he was 6'5", he's this big guy, and he's kind of out jumping everyone. And he's able to be more physical, and it's a totally different game when the pads go on. Right. Like what A.D. Mitchell was doing in terms of the way that he was moving. I know he's not getting jammed the way that he can at the line of scrimmage. Without pads on, but the way that he was moving, that's something that I think could translate to put the pads on. We'll see the same stuff up at Grand Park. I think that's why I was more encouraged. It wasn't like he was just like physically dominating 50-50 balls without pads on. It was like he was getting open, like with a capital O, out there on the field.
And you talk about this offense. One of the big things that was brought up kind of all week was, I know Jim Bob talked about, you want to see just chaos in a way. I mean, what was the bar rescue?
Stress test.
Stress test.
Yeah. Colts are coming in with a new POS system.
Yes.
And the mixologist to do the same cocktails that every other bar does.
Which
it's
Bar
a great
Rescue
show.
is a great show. That is
Anyways,
a great show.
Continue with your point.
But I loved watching kind of that backyard football come into play, and Adonai Mitchell was a guy that was typically, maybe not every time, but a lot of times the guy getting the football. And so he's already working his way into that end of that offense where you could start to see that connection. And that's why, we talk about the rest day that AR had, but Larra mentioned it. That was the only one he had. So all of this time, getting that chemistry together, they talked about how, that they're going to go off and throw before they report for camp. So all of this connection that they are gaining is so vital because you could see what he has with Pittman. You knew what he had with Downs. I can only imagine what that deep ball is going to be for Pierce, and if you can have that connection with Mitchell already, I'm really anxious to see what this looks like.
I want to go back to one thing we learned about AR, and I believe this was something you discussed when he went on Pat McAfee just 2 weeks ago. He's up to 255, he said. Like, he's added a lot of good muscle as well. And that's been one of the things that he's maybe benefited from in having all this time coming off of, the rehab and going through all of that is just the ability to strengthen his body too. And I think that is another factor that will come into play in terms of keeping him healthy, keeping him protected, the durability factor, and then also just being able to reinforce a lot of the things that he is able to do, those things that, had him dubbed, the unicorn, the alien in terms of, the speed and the force and, the strength that he is able to play with.
Well, even just think about it at 255, like, if you're a defensive end, you might weigh about as much as him, and now you're trying to get a paw on him and bring him down to the pocket. It's a lot harder to bring down 255 than it is 210. I remember reading something about or hearing something about Lamar Jackson last year, where he did kind of bulk up a little bit, and it maybe
now he's gone the other way. He's like super lean this year,
back the other way. But last year he bulked up a little bit. Which kind of it maybe took away some of the like quickness that he had. He still has a straight line speed, but maybe a little bit less on the quickness side. But it was harder to bring him down in the pocket. So with Anthony, who already has great pocket awareness, that is like a calling card of his game. Now you just add that little bit extra muscle, a little bit on the quads and the hamstrings, and all of a sudden, like you get a hand on the guy. Like you better get two hands and like your whole body weight to bring him down, because that is not going to be an easy task for anyone. And that ability to avoid sacks that he already has, I think just adding even that extra 5 pounds of muscle, like that's going to make it even better for him to avoid those negative drive-killing plays that sacks usually become.
I was, not to draw aside there, I was laughing during that because I was just envisioning JJ trying to tackle Anthony Richardson with two hands and the body.
255 pounds. Look at me, man.
I know. That's part of why I was laughing, because I was like, I don't think JJ could tackle him if he really put everything to it.
How many JJs would it take? This is like a math problem. How many JJs would it take to tackle AR5?
Knowing my strength at about 170 pounds, it would take, I would say, 3.
Okay.
I was going to say 4.
Okay.
I would say you're probably safe just making it all 11 and just everybody on 1. There you go.
Yeah. I think probably. Well,
I mean, you might just go for the shoestrings, buddy.
Right, is he standing still? Because I can't catch him.
Yeah.
If he takes off running, there is no shot.
Yeah.
A single one of me, even if you put a pack of 12 out there, is catching him. It's not going to happen.
No.
So if he's in the pocket and he escapes the pocket, we have bad discipline in our lanes. He's gone. We're not getting him down at all.
So what you're saying is that it doesn't matter.
It actually kind of does
because I can see the bad discipline in the lanes from JJ.
That would be accurate, because I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah. Am I going against the Colts offensive line? We're not even getting close to it. Are you kidding?
Where are we? What just happened?
Bernard Ryman is just shoving me to the ground with one hand. It's like, nope, you're good.
Yeah, he would too.
Not a shot.
He would too.
Not a shot.
Sorry for that quick aside. I apologize
Honestly,
to the listeners. I'm sorry.
I've never thought about that. If you're surprised to know, I've never thought about how many of me it would take to tackle Anthony
I figured.
Richardson.
That's all right. That's probably for the best.
See, I think about that.
Okay,
Claire was like, well, actually, I
our listeners
sat up
and
all
our
night
viewers-
last night.
For our listeners and our viewers, how many of you would it take to tackle Anthony Richardson?
God.
I want to know that. Tell me. Is it more than 4? Or are we gonna? Is this gonna be like that whole thing where you get like those dumb men who are like, I could beat Serena Williams in
right,
a tennis
yeah.
match.
Oh, no,
It's like,
let's not
She
start
would
that.
take your arm
Let's
off
not
with
start
one
that.
serve, you idiot. It's not gonna happen. Maybe don't be too overconfident about it. Anyways, anything else that stood out to you last week, Casey?
Yes, I think the return of Jelani Woods. We had last year the hamstrings that just continue to keep him sidelined. Seeing him out there and making plays, that was good. But then ultimately the biggest thing I took away is the defense seemed to be probably the tale of the days. I thought the defense, they were very strong and steady throughout. And this time it's hard because, there's no pads. So defenders, especially like the secondary, I couldn't imagine what going through these practices are like because ultimately you have no leverage. What can you do?
You can play technique, but
and your calls are very basic because it's all for the secondary. This part of the year is very, very difficult, and I thought for the most part the defense really looked very good. Which that's what you want to see. I mean, you return everybody. You add a guy like Latu into that line. It's all looking the way that it should at this time. Where we hope when camp rolls around they take another step. And ultimately, I mean, you want the defense to be a very, very big strength of this team moving forward.
I'm also going to note something that probably people wouldn't notice on the field, if you were out there for minicamp or whatever it is. But in conversations that I've had, and I'm going to say over the last 3 weeks collectively, with people across the building, people over in football, like, they're walking around like, it's a different dynamic right now. Mm-hmm. There's something different about this team and this group happening right now. And that is a credit to Shane and what he has built and, the standard that he has placed and the expectation that they all know that there is. But then beyond that, he's really reinforced this kind of closeness in the locker room. Like there is a dynamic within these guys, within these position groups, within the rookie class, with all of it, that you are seeing something that has not been feeling something within that locker room. And when you have conversations with guys, when you pop your head in the locker room, or when they're coming in and out of meetings, this just feels different than what we have had in this building in a really long time.
Yeah, I think it's you're in year 2 of Shane. The expectations are clear, and you're returning 91% of the starts you had last year. I mean, most of the starts that the Colts are not getting back were Gardner Minshew the second and Zach Moss, who were backups last year,
right?
Who are now they're got better opportunities elsewhere, but those guys are being replaced largely with their starts by 2 of the star players on your team, and Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor,
right?
So the expectations are clear. The camaraderie was built last year. There's remarkable continuity across the board. I think that's a really good thing to build on. The one thing I just want to make mention of, and Larra, I'm sure you can speak to this too, getting to know Latu over the last couple of weeks. He got asked, I think it might have been my question, or someone else's on Thursday. Like, okay, this is your first real break since last summer.
Right.
Going into your last year at UCLA. Like, what are you going to do with it? And he was basically like,
Get back to work.
Get back to work.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, so here's
he's not going to the beach. He's going to work.
Because he's had breaks. He had breaks.
He had a medically retired.
He had a medical
Great
retirement. This is a guy who is not going to let his foot off the gas at any point because he's already had that. That's not a guy who, when you get to, I don't even know, when's our bye week? Week like 10?
No, week 14.
14. Okay, I can't even think. Like
Yeah.
he's not gonna be like. His mentality, his body might need it, but I can't wait to get a week off. I can't wait. No, he's had football taken away from him, ripped away from him. He has fought tooth and nail. He and his mom fought to get another opportunity in football. This isn't a guy who is thinking, I can't wait to get away from the game. This is everything to him to have this opportunity. First defensive player to go off the board, come to this organization with already a fantastic defensive front. You've got great leadership. There's an expectation. Yeah, that guy is absolutely hungry to continue getting back after it. I bet he's out there already working with Coach Ed. Shout out to Coach Ed out there in LA where a lot of the guys go and do work. Guarantee he's there. A guy doesn't get drafted by a team, come in, and then the first break he has from that, go out and get the horseshoe tattooed on his arm.
Right.
If he ain't hungry as hell, you know?
That is very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
And I love that you mentioned, this is adding with Leatu, but you mentioned the defensive line that he joins. We did a little exercise a couple weeks ago, and there are 7 players on the defensive line that were drafted in the first or second round.
This is good.
That you talk about, Chris Ballard has talked about the trenches. You have to build up front on both. You talk about what this defensive
and
line
Grover
is.
Stewart was what, a fourth or fifth round?
Yeah, you look at it, it's like, well, Grover Stewart's the only guy that's not.
Well, Samson was a third.
Samson was a third rounder.
Okay, so let's go through them. Let's go through them because I think our listeners and our viewers might be thinking about it. Okay. So you got Kwity Paye, Dio Dangbo, first round, second round. DeForest Buckner, first round. Tyquan Lewis, second round. Raekwon Davis was a second round pick. You have
Leatu, who we just talked to, first round.
First round pick.
7th one, I'll get you. It got me. It took me.
See, I thought when I got Raekwon Davis early on, I thought I was like, I got it.
Did you say Samson?
No, he was a third rounder.
The 7th one was a former first round pick.
Yep. From an AFC South.
Taven Bryan.
There you
Bryan
go,
was the
Taven
first
Bryan.
round pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars.
But 7, like when I saw
That's
that
almost
number,
an entire rotation.
that is incredible. Like you talk about, Chris has preached that for so long. It's there. He has got his squad, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to we talked about you almost
and then just to kind of again double back on this, the 2 guys who are key parts of that rotation who are not top 2-round picks are Grover Stewart, who's your best run defender, and Samson Ebukam, who led the team in sacks last year.
Exactly.
So that's pretty good.
It's very good. Yeah. It's a very fun. It makes me almost look. You don't ever want to say you have too many of something, but
There's been way too much math on this podcast today. This is what happens when we don't have a run.
Sorry, Larra. I'm sorry, but
many numbers.
I was very when I'll be honest, when they selected Leatu, I was like, I wonder where he's going to fit in, because you draft a guy in the first round, typically he's a starter, but then you look at it, it's like, it just makes sense because you've now, you saw that rotation and how it worked last year. You set a franchise record for sacks, and it's because of the rotation. You had a handful of guys that are all going to get multiple. You just add another body into that. Oh, man, good luck, offensive coordinators, for dealing with that line, because there's a lot of guys, and it's going to be fun to watch.
To quote our good friend Rick Venturi, Ambien players up front.
Yes. Plenty of them, for sure.
Those that keep you up at night, you got to take the Ambien.
I love Rick's phrases. I can't wait.
He's got a whole bunch of them.
I can't wait until we get the first aspirin tablet from Anthony Richardson.
This is what gets me through. This is
Joe Flacco can throw an aspirin tablet too.
Between now and when we get to training camp, especially between now and when we start doing preseason games, what gets me through is getting 2 or 3 texts a week from Rick with just different insights on things.
Yeah, you want to talk about someone who doesn't take time off.
No.
Yeah.
No days off for that man, and it is my favorite thing.
I have to, here's my little plug for, putting me up on a pedestal. I live about 2 minutes from Rick, and he drives on his motorcycle. I'm sure you hear him talk about it. He loves on these, and those are my favorite. When I hear the motorcycle coming down the street and he stops in my house and we just get 30 minutes of whatever he's thinking about that day, those are my favorite. Like he told me the other day, he goes, I stopped by your house, but your wife was home and you weren't, and she didn't want to talk football. I was like, all right, Rick, I'll be there the next time, I promise. So that is the thing I love. You talk about that. I love when Rick is here. Oh,
yeah, he was telling me that he was up on Morse, and I think he did some radio last week and different things. And I was like, all of a sudden, I'm like, I need to find a Friday afternoon, go and meet Rick up on Morse, and just get all of my fix, to get me through for the next couple, at least through like 4th of July.
Yeah.
Because then that's
Right.
what I'm going to be studying before we go into training camp and going to doing our, preseason broadcasts and all of that.
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
so much fun.
Speaking of training camp, we had night practices coming up against the Arizona
I
Cardinals.
thought you were going to start singing night moves.
We're not at Santa's Pub in Nashville, Lara. That'll come in week 6, week 5?
Yeah, but Arizona Cardinals coming in. The
Arizona
return
Cardinals
of
coming to-
Jonathan
coming to
Gannon.
Grant
Yeah, JG.
Yep, for two joint practices in the evening, same as it was last year with the Bears. And then the Colts are going to have a joint practice with the Bengals as well before they play the preseason finale. So again, similar schedule to what it was last year.
Yep.
With those two joint practices here, one on the road. This one's a little bit closer in Cincinnati. No Phillies game to go to though.
Dang it.
Yeah.
Maybe a
No
Reds game?
opportunities for me to run into Matt Conti and his dad while holding a full beer bat.
We had a time.
I
JJ and
missed
stayed
that
till
story.
the end. That was a great game.
We went with like 8 other of our coworkers.
Yeah.
6 of
Bryce
them
Harper's
left.
on fire.
Bryce Harper hit a game-tying 3-run jack with 2 outs in the 9th.
Yeah.
And then we stayed in. I think they lost in extras.
They
but,
did, yeah.
that was
Okay.
fun. Yeah,
It
Reds
was.
aren't in town though. No Ellie De La Cruz on the schedule this summer.
Yeah.
Guess we'll just have to stop for La Rosa's or Skyline and
I will
just
not
get
be
our
stopping
food
for
fixed.
Skyline.
That's
We
what
don't- we
everybody
don't need to
says.
get into
I
it. We don't need to get into
understand.
that.
I get it. The press box will have it, right? In that their
I
press
think they
box
do.
food.
They do.
Yeah, I think they do.
I will
Makes
also not
sense.
be touching that. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode and watching this episode of the official Colts podcast here on the Colts Audio Network and on the Colts YouTube page. We will be back next week with one more official podcast before we go on hiatus.
Gonna try to get a special guest next week. So yes. So we'll see.
Listen
we
to that
on
tease.
track for that guest?
Oh, I see what
Hey.
you did there. I see. Stay tuned.
All right, stay tuned for that one. All right, for Larra and for Casey, I'm JJ. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of the official Colts podcast. Talk to you next week. So long.